name is Mike Lejeune. I'm honored to get a chance to interview a few of the key breakout speakers that we have at Staffing World 2017. And for those who have not had a chance to spend any time with Scott Wintrip, I'm excited to share this brief interview with you on the topic that he's going to be presenting on, which is Strategic Brilliance Simple Secrets to Effective Leadership. Scott has got over 18 years of experience in consulting with companies literally around the globe. Sit back and listen to a few of his concepts and thoughts and specific takeaways that you're going to get if you attend his session at our Staffing World Conference, because I sure hope you do.
Scott, I was really looking forward to getting a chance to visit with you on the subject that you're going to be speaking about at the ASA Staffing World in Chicago, for two reasons. One is I've known you for a long time, I've followed your work, but when I saw this topic of strategic brilliance and its simple secrets to effective leadership, it really spoke to me because of the brand that I work with, which is called Simple Leadership. That's my website name. And so when I looked at this, I'm going, I got to find out what Scott's thoughts are on this subject. And to help those people who might be listening into this podcast, can you just give us a quick sort of snippet of your background and how you ended up taking on a topic like this?
Sure. Well, first, let me say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, Mike, and look forward to sharing some thoughts. I'm sure you'll have some as well between the two of us that we can share on this very important topic of simplicity and leadership. And I think the reason why it's so near and dear to my heart was my leadership, my strategies, my training, my work was anything but simple in the beginning. Like a lot of people, like a lot of human beings, I got really good at making things complex. In fact, you'll love this. One of my bosses said to me at one point, "It's you really smart guys that are the most difficult." And I only heard the first part, "you really smart guys." I thought this is a compliment. I'm being paid. And it really wasn't a compliment. She was basically saying that I was overthinking things, yet I only heard the part I wanted to hear. Because I was young and I was kind of, I was young and dumb, and I needed to grow up some. So, I got into staffing because I walked into a staffing office back in college, and candidly, I was looking for beer money. And a temp job was a great way to do that, but it planted a seed, and so it put me on a path where I eventually joined the industry. I overthought this thing. That's what that leader was doing. She was pointing out to me that this is a relatively simple business, and I was making it way too complex. And simple doesn't mean easy, don't get me wrong, but that really put me on a path to make my own leadership simpler, to make strategy simpler. And I've learned a lot about that. A lot of it was through the School of Hard Knocks. If you looked at, and I doubt I'll ever share them if I could find them. If you looked at my initial strategies I ever wrote, they're embarrassingly complex. I mean, they're horrible. I mean, I planned for every contingency you could think of. If this happens, we'll do this, and if that happens, we'll do that. That's not what good strategy is. Everybody ignored it because it was too complex. And so I learned from that. I learned to streamline and strategize and break things down into steps. And 30 years later, my mantra is simple is sustainable. I live my life that way. I live my work that way. And I'll tell you, it's a pretty low-stress way to go about doing things. And so I can't wait to share some of these things that, I've done a lot of work at Staffing World and talked to a lot of people. And some people have heard some things from me multiple times. There's stuff in this session that I've never shared before that I can't wait to share, and it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, and I love what you're talking about. Leadership is simple. It's just, unfortunately, it's not easy. And the reason it's not easy is because a lot of times we carry our own baggage into the leadership space, especially because as leaders, it's very difficult to go to school to be a leader. It's most of us. Yeah. It's been more of an evolution, an osmosis that's taken place because of experiences we've had in the past, and that's why I'm kind of curious about your journey of when with the consulting you've done in the leadership space. Where do we have a tendency to make it more complex than what it needs to be? Can you give me an example of what you've seen?
Yeah, let's talk comp plans for a second because I think that's
going to start with that topic.
I think it's one of the prime examples of where we make things complex. And, some of this is ego. And I'll admit it certainly was for me. And this is a hard thing for a lot of leaders to admit, is how much their ego comes into play. And part of the ego is we want to show people how smart we are. And we are. In fact, the smarter we are, the more likely we want to show people. And I think with maturity, I turned 50 this year, and, I look now at that, my level of humility is at its highest point, and that's very strategic, and part of it is being knocked around by life. Part of it is by failing a number of times at things and learning from it. But part of it, too, is that, the simpler I make this, the more I get the heck out of the way, the better it works. And that's true with comp plans. I often have people, I've worked on thousands of comp plans over the past 18 years. And usually when people bring theirs to me, I hear the same thing, Mike, and you've probably heard it as well, is, our comp plan's a little too complex. Well, it's always more complex than a little too complex when they say that. And, they're trying to be really brilliant, and they're trying to plan for contingencies, and they're trying to enroll people to, build better deals and create teamwork. And it just becomes this convoluted thing where one of the first things I do when I work on a comp plan isn't looking at the paper. I do look at that. I go talk to the staff. And here's what I do. I just ask people, tell me about the comp plan. How does it work? And then I ask them, how much are you going to make on this next deal? What's the next deal you're working on? How much are you personally going to make on that? And 90+% of the time, people cannot tell me. That tells me something right there. The comp plan is way too complex. If they can't crunch the number in their head, the comp plan has already lost some of its effectiveness, because this is a money-motivating business. If we do great work, which is where I think we start, and we deliver great value, we'll be richly rewarded. So we have to do things in that order. But realistically, this is a money-motivated business. And if people can't crunch the number in their head, this loses power. The investment that people are making in compensation is partially lost when people can't simply talk about the comp plan and know what the ramifications are when they do certain things. And this is one of the reasons why margins of some companies are quite low, and they could be higher, because firms are not charging for the level of value that they're providing, because people aren't charging for that level and keeping in mind how they're going to be rewarded along the way. When you have a simple plan with a base compensation, with a percentage of commission, and you keep it that streamlined without all kinds of kickers and caveats and this and that, they work much better from a motivational perspective.
I love this, especially, and I realize that the workshop that you'll be leading at Staffing World is not specifically on comp plans, but I think that it sounds like by somebody applying this strategic brilliance, sort of concept, it'll make them maybe go back and rethink the way that they're approaching it. I love the fact of what you're saying. One of the best ways for us to be able to tell is our compensation plan too complex is to bring our people into the office and sit down across the desk and say, explain to me how you're going to be paid on the next deal, as opposed to me spending time telling them and reminding them. Finding out how much they actually absorb themselves, and do they have the ability to take it from concept to put it in the reality. And what I've experienced over the years, that's a conversation that even if our comp plan is somewhat simple, it's well worth having that conversation multiple times, because if our compensation plans can actually become a demotivator, and we lose a strategic, I'm going to go back to this word where I'm going to use the strategic impact that a good compensation plan can have, because it can add juice and fuel and energy to the fire. I love this word, strategic brilliance. Help me understand, why that? Well, how'd you come up with that topic, and where do you see it working, and also where does it get into people's way?
Well, I have to acknowledge you for the strategic brilliance you just exemplified, because you said something really important, and I'm sure it was conscious on your part. You probably are counseling leaders on a regular basis, Mike, and the work you do about not having to remind people so much to do their doggone job. And you said that in what you said, they're having to remind people about the comp plan, and you said versus people can figure it out for themselves. Great leadership and strategic brilliance isn't about having to remind people of things. It's about not having to remind them, because the plan is simple, whether it's the comp plan or the strategy from getting here to there by the end of the year. It's about simplicity. My definition of strategic brilliance is you craft a simple strategy that can be followed to near perfection. And I'm thinking right now one of my favorite leaders, who happens to be out of the UK, a guy by the name of Mark. And Mark has been incredibly successful. He has led both public and closely held companies. He's worked in the States. He's worked in the UK. He's actually worked across the globe. And the reason Mark has been so successful is that he understands that execution is the most important thing. It isn't about the plan, or it isn't about what's on paper. It isn't about, the brilliant marketing. It isn't about your website. It is about execution. Can people step up every single day and do enough of the right things in the right ways to create the right result? And so he's always focused on that. And that's why even before I met him, he was focused on crafting a very simple plan and then helping people follow it to near perfection. And that's the opposite of what a lot of people do. Look, we have a lot of smart people in the staffing and recruitment industry. And I find that, the people who come to Staffing World in particular are pretty darn smart. They recognize they don't know everything. It's one of the reasons they're showing up, is they're filling themselves up for the next year. One of the trade-offs of being really, really smart is, we talked about this before, is they try to outsmart this thing. So a lot of them are brilliant strategists. And what they try to do is the opposite of strategic brilliance. They try to design a near-perfect strategy that is almost impossible to follow perfectly. So that's the difference. Is strategic brilliance is all about simplicity, so you can achieve perfection in execution, versus, so many people work so hard at creating a brilliant strategy that then gets put in a desk drawer because it's too hard to follow. People can't execute it perfectly because it's too overwhelming. There's too much to do, too much to track, too much to monitor, too many tasks, and it just overwhelms people. Versus, and I'm going to show a chart on this at Staffing World, something I've never shown before, of the difference between simplicity and complexity and the impacts. And they're going to see by company results, I've plotted this on a chart, the patterns are so obvious when you look at the differences in results of the firms with simple strategies versus the complex ones. The ones with simple strategies do much, much better, substantially better than the ones with the complex, convoluted strategies.
I've got a research project that I've been working on for the last couple of years, interviewing C-suite leaders, people like Jamie Root, president of Houston Texans, and Jim Hackett, who's chairman of the board of Anadarko Petroleum. And one of the things that I found in talking to them is that their definition of what makes a CEO effective is that they all have a tremendous amount of things that they have to do in their role. But what makes one more effective is the ability to look at the broad array of different things they have to operate, and to pick out the 3 or 4 things that are most effective, that would have the most impact on a company. And I was thinking about that as you were explaining this strategic brilliance at the desk level with our recruiters, is that we have to help them as leaders be able to make better decisions on what are the 3 or 4 things that are most impactful on their desk in the market that they play in, the economy that they're playing in, and their role developmentally. Might be something different for somebody who's in the first 2 years versus somebody in their say in the 10 or 15-year level. But I love this strategic brilliance of being a simple approach, not easy, but to figure out how do we simplify matters. And it sounds like your workshop is geared along the lines to help people to take a step back for just a few minutes and think about, how do I simplify my processes in a way that helps the people that are choosing to follow me to really be much, much more effective in their role?
That's spot on, Mike, and I'm going to jump in because you said something that I think all listeners need to key in on. And if there's one takeaway I want everybody to have, it's actually what you said, is that advice from a CEO of those 3 things, and I heard the word, you said 3 a couple times, and that we, those 3 really important things we do today. And when we put that down at the desk level, every single person can accomplish three important things. And the reason this stood out for me is I met a woman years ago when I was on her desk, a fellow recruiter. Her name was Lori, and Lori was out of Tennessee. And Lori was really successful. I was doing really well too, and she was successful. And she just seemed to have an approach that was simpler than mine. You know, I was still a bit making things convoluted at that point. That's an understatement, making them way too convoluted. And, you know, I was stressed. She just seemed to be successful with less effort, less stress. And we were in a workshop environment intra-company, and she, you know, did a presentation about how she went about her day. And I will never forget the things she said. She said, every day I just focus on accomplishing three things. It may be filling this order here, lining up a couple candidates for what I know is coming up, and then managing a couple interviews because I know I can close the deal. And as long as I get those three things done, that's a good day. And then tomorrow I'm going to do the same thing. It'll be three different things. And, of course, people started asking questions, and they started, saying, but hold on, there's all these other things and responsibilities we have. And she said, yeah, and most days I get to those, and other days I don't, and it all comes out in the wash. And it was one of these V8 smack my head moments, Mike, because I was like, holy crap, you know, that's the reality. The reality is that we'll never get everything done in this business because there's always too much to do. But we can do three important things. If we do the three most important things, yeah, we'll get to some of the other stuff. Today we might get to some of it. Tomorrow we'll get to more of it. The day after that, just a little bit of it, but it all comes out in the wash. But if I do just those three important things every single day, and so as leaders, you and I and everybody else listening to this, we not only have to do that ourselves, we have to insist upon that of our staff. We model it first because what we model is what they're going to do, but then we teach this same strategy because the reality is this is a big business with too much to do, too many responsibilities. It's overwhelming. The inbox is always overflowing. So we have to make prioritization this simple because we do that thing I talked about before of the near-perfect execution, it's going to happen because we're executing the really most important stuff.
I'm so looking forward to getting a chance to see you unpack this, and more than just a 15 or 20-minute podcast, but actually having a live session where people can have a lot of interaction with you, and especially because of, you used a word here, and we'll use this to wrap up, Scott. You said simple is sustainable. And what I love about your message is that I can tell that anybody who chooses to attend one of the workshops that you're going to be leading, the material that they're going to walk out with is going to be sustainable because they're going to come away with some specific action plans, and especially for one reason. It's rare that we get an opportunity to work on our business, so we're so caught up in working in the business. We're in the line of fire. We're trying to deal with things on a day-to-day basis, but I was willing to come and play with you for the hour or so, the time that you're going to have with them in this session. I can see how they're really going to have something that can have a huge impact on developing the way that they think as a leader. So I really appreciate your time and your thoughts on this. And if anybody has who listens to this might have a follow-up question for you on this, and might want to engage with you, what's the best way to contact you?
There's two ways. So, the first way is I'm going to leave my email here on the podcast. So it's Scott with two T's at scottwintrip.com. And, as you're starting to think about strategy and where strategy has gone well and it's not, I want you to think about some of those challenges, and I'd love for people to email me what some of those specific challenges are regarding strategy, because I will bake some of that into our hour and a half that we have together on the Thursday of Staffing World. And certainly you can pose a question my way, and I'll either answer that if I can in the email or promise to answer it in a live session if it requires more detail. But a second way that you can engage is if you go to highvelocityhiring.com. That happens to be the website for my new book. And if you want to learn about that. But the other thing you can do is it's a springboard to all kinds of other resources on my site, and that's my homework. Mike, I sleep next to a teacher every night, so she rubs off on me, so I find myself getting homework. I'd love for people to go out to my website and just do a search in the search window for the word strategy and read up a little bit on some of the things that I've rolled out on strategy so you have a bit of a primer. Because if you do that coming in, you'll have a bit of a head start, some background information, and you'll have a foundation foundation, especially if you've not worked with me before, that when we start talking about some of this, those foundations that you have, you'll be able to build upon that in our hour and a half that we have together. Because quite honestly, not a lot of time to talk about something as big as strategy. We'll get a lot done in that time, but if people have some foundations, it'll go even better.
What you've done with this program you're putting together is you've taken a word that people, myself included, my eyes used to glaze over when it came time to put together the strategic plan for the year, because I'd walk out of the meeting, it may be a day or 2-day event, with a lot of concept, but real difficult to implement anything. And I love this material and the thoughts that you've developed over the years on taking a strategy and adding the word brilliance to it, because all of us want to be brilliant, and really putting in some simple secrets that you're going to unfold. So thanks so much, and look forward to getting a chance to play with you in Chicago.
Sounds good, Mike. I appreciate it.